Hello, everybody, and welcome to Vinely, a Sommtable show where we showcase some of the best sommeliers, wine experts, winemakers, distillers, and brewers. Today, I am very honored to be with sommelier Nadia Pavlevska, who was born in Bulgaria and is today a professional wine consultant, wine educator, wine and private corporate event um, a client producer, event producer, nonprofit and restaurants as well, and also does educational seminars and wine programs as well. It's quite a lot. She is also a professional wine judge at some of US's largest wine competition. Nadia is a certified sommelier, of course, in the Court of Masters of Sommeliers. She is a certified specialist of wine with the American Society of Wine Educators. Also, in addition to that, she's certified with the International Etiquette and Business Protocol Consultant with the Washington School of Protocol. Nadia's interest in wine began in her native country of Bulgaria, Sofia per se, and a region that was once one of the world's largest wine producers. So I want to welcome Nadia to the show. Hello, Nadia.
Hi, thank you for having me, Birdie. It's
Oh,
kind of exciting.
it's very exciting to have you because Bulgarian wine is super interesting to me because it's in a region that we don't hear about a lot. As I just mentioned, was extremely prevalent in production a long time ago, and now with technology and with a lot of discoveries of new varietals, are gearing up to producing some fantastic wine. So, hence our discussion today, which I'm very happy to be doing. I would love to also see if I could get you to give me a little background, but in doing that, if you can just tell me a little bit about what you're doing currently, because we are in a very strange environment because of the virus, but also, give us an update on your career and everything you've been doing as a sommelier.
Okay. Yeah, just kind of weird, crazy times indeed. All I'm trying in these days is just kind of regroup and be prepared for the new reality that is just kind of awaiting us after this self distancing subsides. But as you said, Birdie, one of my main income actually was wine events. I love doing consumer wine events, corporate wine events. And needless to say, I can't do those right now. So I was trying to just kind of revamp the whole idea about events, seeing what's going on Zoom and the virtual kind of reality we live in. I started doing a virtual wine tastings. And actually, I'm in the process of getting a contract with a bank to do a corporate virtual wine events for their, not for their customers, but for their employees. Um, how I started this, why I'm concentrating, I'm doing a lot of virtual tastings right now. It's also because, as you know, I have my wine club. And I'm focusing on it right now, and it's the NP Som Wine Club through Uncorked in Hermosa Beach. And what I loved about the club, it's a monthly membership club. We were gathering every month. We had an NP Som pickup night. I was trying to build a wine community of like-minded people who get together. We drink some wine and cheese, and I miss those times. I just miss connecting with people. I miss my NP Som club members. And actually, the virtual tastings that I started doing, and takes a lot out of me because I'm not used to being in front of the camera, to be quite honest. It's completely different than doing events. It's kind of strange. I don't mind talking to 100 people if I have to in person, but this virtual thing, it's kind of freaks me out
It's
sometimes.
intimidating.
Yeah, but I started doing it to connect with my NP Som club members, and I'm trying to grow my club. And finally, I also still have a project, even though now I do it more remotely, about consulting an amazing place on their wine program in Alabama. But I think we might talk about this a little bit later.
Yeah,
Or
what I would love to do right now is to get to know you a little bit more. I think that there's a very interesting story that I caught in talking with you beforehand, which was basically an experience that you had as a child or as a teen, I should say, in Bulgaria, where you traded brandy and cigarettes, and I think that's like an amazing story to start this our interview with. So, what was that about? How did that come about?
uh, thank you, Birdie. for crushing my professional image right now
No,
and making me
everybody
and
story. So
doing yes contrabanda of tobacco and brandy in my youth. Yes, yes, I told you this story, didn't I? Interestingly enough, before I started drinking actually wine as a child, I was drinking hard liquor and especially brandy. My grandpa loved brandy, and he would let me drink it even before the age of 10 because I think he passed away when I was 9, so it must have been before that. But um, anyway, this seems like ages ago. As I mentioned to you, I was a ballroom dancer, and as a ballroom dancer who was competing and going to different places every weekend, my love and passion for traveling kind of expanded. And one of my first trips ever abroad was actually dance camp in the former Czechoslovakia. Now it's Czech Republic and Slovakia, and I was 14 years old. It was Communist International Dance camp in the woods. It was very hardcore. We were just climbing mountains, dancing in the middle of there was like a dance floor in the middle of the woods. But anyway, interesting part about this during communism, I had to bring some money with me. But in communism, you couldn't exchange and take as much Czech currency with you as you wanted. I had a limit, let's say, very limited amount, like 100 Bulgarian leva. And my parents wanted to give me more money just to be safe, and everything happens. So, in order to do this, but we couldn't get more, we did two things. First of all, when you exchange 100 leva, they put a stamp in your passport. That's it. You took your money, you can't take any more. But my whole family got international passports and went, and they got their currency even though they weren't traveling, and they gave me their currency. But on top of that, Bulgaria during communism was famous in the Eastern Bloc behind the Iron Curtain with two commodities and many others, but two were really kind of shiny. It was Bulgarian brandy, which is still amazing, and I love the Bulgarian brandy. I love cognac in general, of course, and Bulgarian tobacco. We were huge producer of tobacco. So what I did is a little child, I got these huge, huge backpacks because we were also camping. And I remember when my father put it on my back, I fell over with the backpack. I couldn't carry it, but it was full with Bulgarian brandy and Bulgarian tobacco as another form of currency. And we took the train from Bulgaria through Romania, Hungary to go to Czech Republic. And when we stopped at the train station, everybody sees us in bag. They know it's a Bulgarian train. Like they were asking, "Do you have tobacco? Do you have brandy?" So I made some money or exchanged it for things in the camp. So that's it. Here you have it, Birdie.
well, I told you we all have a story, and yours is a lot better than mine. I thought mine was crazy trading skateboards, but I think I would have much rather have traded tobacco and brandy. Uh,
We had to do whatever we had to do.
exactly.
Tough times.
Absolutely, absolutely, and why not? So that in a way, you described your path as a dancer. You started to travel. One of your interests, which is to travel. How did that lead into you becoming a sommelier? Could you describe that path?
um, yeah, of course, it had a part to do with it because I traveled a lot. I traveled as much as I can. First of all, of course, my love for wine started as a young child in Bulgaria, or like a youngster, drinking wine with my family. It was usually homemade wine, though. So many families in Bulgaria until today, everybody produces their own homemade wine. But I I traveled. I moved to Austria, where I actually got exposed for first time to like many international wines. I remember actually as a poor student in Salzburg. I went to Salzburg University. I would go to the grocery store and I was drinking this Austrian wine. Might have been like, I don't know, Blaufränkisch or Blau Portuguesa in a big, big bottle. It's called the Three Musketeers. Or my first French wine, it was like €2, €3 a bottle, and I was fascinated. But I just started tasting wines there. And then moving to the United States, of course, a completely different realm of wines open to me. And working in restaurants while in school for so many years, I was exposed to so many amazing wines. And I was fortunate enough to go to many wine regions. And it's just, this grew my passion and of course led me to become who I am today as a sommelier.
And it seems to me Bulgarian wine itself, these are very high-end wines, and I think that you have the know-how, the knowledge of Bulgarian wine from being, not only a sommelier but also having been, being that you were raised in Bulgaria. So, could you talk a little bit about some Bulgarian varietals and what kind of wines they're making right now? Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay. Um, by all means, I'm not expert on Bulgarian wines for one very set reason. Wines are not very widely accessible in the United States, and I wish that this changes. There's only one place you can buy them online right now. It's called BulgarianWines.com. I just spoke to the owner, who is a winemaker in Sonoma. He's a Bulgarian guy, and he's committed to start bringing more and more Bulgarian wines to the United States, and I can't wait. I just don't travel enough to Bulgaria to enjoy Bulgarian wines the way I want to. But let me give you a little bit of background of the Bulgarian wine history, the way I know it and the way I understand it. It's quite unique, and I'm very kind of prideful when I think and talk about it. But first of all, Bulgaria, it's one of the oldest regions in the world. And I'm not just saying this. You can just kind of reference it, just go back and see that wines, there are just traces of winemaking and wine consumptions 4,000 years BCE, which is kind of incredible. This was I don't pronounce it good in English, is the Thracian tribes. We say Trakici, and we still have many areas in Bulgaria called the same. The Thracian actually valley. It's a lot of wine is made there, but a lot of history. Also, some of the oldest, actually, I read recently, the oldest designated kind of appellation in the world was found on a land from in Bulgaria, which is, I think, was by some, it was 2,000 years, I think, BC, something like this. But anyway, long history of producing wine. And what I love about Bulgaria, it has some unique, incredible indigenous grape varieties, such as what I'm drinking right now. It's Mavrut.
Mavrut.
It's one of the signature, I think it's establishing itself as a signature grape variety of Bulgaria that I truly enjoy. But also another one, it's near my house, actually, not my house. Yes, it's grown only in a small area south from Sofia by Struma River. It's called Melnik or Shiroka Melniška Luza. There's some also clones and variations like Melnik 55. It's kind of very vibrant, fresh red wine. It just reminds me of kind of Gamay, Pinot Noir, Grenache, just kind of versus the Mavrut. It's kind of more inky, kind of richer style. And these are ancient grape varieties. However, there is a new grape variety that is incredibly dear to my heart, is Rubin. Rubin was actually created in the 1950s. So it's not ancient, but I consider it very Bulgarian and I love it. It's a cross between Nebbiolo, which is my favorite red variety in the whole wide world, and Syrah. So you can't go wrong. How can you go wrong by crossing Syrah and Nebbiolo, two incredible grape varieties? Use your imaginations to imagine what this magic in the bottle tastes like. But this one's fantastic. So we have many white varieties as well, of course, like Tamyanka and Red Muscat. And of course, a lot. Still, the main plantings are the international grape varieties. Money doesn't stink. We have to do it. Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot. I see some good Pinot Noirs coming from Bulgaria too. Not there yet, but a lot of Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. But let's backtrack just a little bit. let me tell you if I get too long and bore you with it, but
Not at all.
it's interesting what politics and communism and everything did to the industry and how it shaped the industry in Bulgaria. So in the 70s and 80s, Bulgaria was actually not producer, but number 4 exporter in the world. It was quite popular. Of course, it was during communism, mainly in the Eastern Bloc. 90% of the wine was exported to former Russia, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, some of it to England. And we still export. Actually, it's one of our biggest markets. But everything ended when communism ended in 1990 and went downhill from there. Why? It's kind of interesting, but probably you didn't know. During communism, of course, the government owns everything, and the whole wine industry was a monopoly of the government. But after the Berlin Wall went down, and after I, as a student, as a young actually student, I marched the streets to bring communism down. It's kind of crazy times. They had tanks on the streets. It was super fascinating. But then the government had to give back the land to the former owners based on papers from long time ago.
Yeah.
But guess what? These owners could be like my parents in the capital. They didn't want necessarily now out of the blue to start
Farming,
making wine and run these wineries. So this led actually to basically the death of the wine industry. Is just many of the vineyards were neglected, wineries disappeared until slowly, we joined the EU in 2007, and we started getting influx of capital from the European Union, and we started seeing a lot of investment especially from France and Germany, started investing in Bulgaria, in Bulgarian wine industry. Why? Because I am true believer that Bulgaria has a perfect terroir. This is the hard part. You can learn how to make wine. You can invest as much as you want, but if you don't have the terroir, you don't have, the right environment to produce wine, it's end of story. However, what we were missing before, it was resources, mainly know-how, but also the government didn't care about quality so much. And now it's just after 2007, this small to medium-sized kind of boutique wineries started to pop up, and some incredible wines started to come out on the market. Still a little bit sporadic. When I go to Bulgaria, what I do the first day, my parents go crazy because they're very modest people, and they're just not very well financially, and they think I am a wine snob and I'm wasting money on wine. And I go in the wine store and I fill up my cart with all kinds of Bulgarian wine, and I start opening it. There's unfortunately still not necessarily relationship between quality and price. Shiny label, it's expensive, but the wine is But, so I don't know what I'm buying, and I start opening them. Sometimes I throw away, but I find some amazing gems, and I have seen the quality going up and up.
You mentioned one of those gems, this lady that is one of very few wine producers, female wine producers in Bulgaria. Tell me about her.
Yes, we're talking about a lady winemaker dear to my heart, because also she has the best name in the universe.
Yeah.
Her name is Nadia.
I heard that.
So how can she not be good at wine? So I mentioned to you basically what made me starting to get really into Bulgarian wine and just seeking it and taking a lot of pride in it. It's my trip a couple years ago, where it wasn't sporadic buying wine in the grocery store, but it was actually a very organized wine trip in the wine country. Thanks to, I connected with some wine professionals on Facebook, Bulgarian wine professionals. It's amazing, the sommelier community. I didn't even know that sommeliers exist in Bulgaria. At least they didn't long time ago. I hope they're not listening to me and they're shaking their head and just like, Nadia, but, I just didn't know, where we are in terms of wine specialists and talent in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
But I connected with this amazing group of people, and I actually threw it out there and I said, hey, I'm coming back to Bulgaria. Can you help me pick wineries, or where should I go? They took it very to heart, and they actually came with me and organized an amazing wine trip. Even though it was during harvest, we were kind of accepted, wined and dined in a few Bulgarian wineries, and I was truly impressed. State of the art facility.
So,
But the one with,
so
yes,
sorry, so that people know where we are. We're on the Danube, but are you like north or south of it? Explain where
no.
in Bulgaria are we uh, most?
Okay. I think many people wouldn't know how Bulgaria is, but Bulgaria is kind of like, let's say, like a rectangular in a way. I live my hometown. Town is Sofia, is in very close to our western border with Serbia.
Uh-huh.
We can go through Belgrade. Belgrade is 2 hours from Sofia. It's
Gotcha.
not very smart for capital in terms of wars. Capital shouldn't be so close to the border.
Border.
And when the whole war was happening actually in Belgrade, we had some bombs falling by mistake in Sofia recently, when everything happened. But I'm on the western part.
Yeah.
Bulgaria is only 470 kilometers or 480 kilometers long, which is 300 something miles. And there are many wine regions. I feel like there is wine everywhere, but the region I'm talking about, it's more in the center of Bulgaria. It's not so much northern Italy. Northern Italy. Oh my gosh, because I love Italian wine. Northern Bulgaria, but in the center, near Plovdiv. Plovdiv is one of the most enchanting, ancient, gorgeous city with a lot of history, but there's a lot of winemaking around it. It's in a Thracian valley, and it's just like the area around Plovdiv. Actually, my mom is from the area. She's from a town called Pazarchik. So it was kind of nice to go back and visit those places.
So,
Yeah.
definitely you're on the south side of the Danube, towards the west of it, right? That's where you did your visit, and I interrupted you, but you were having a rediscovery, a moment of rediscovery with Bulgarian wine. What did you find?
Yeah. By the way, all Bulgaria is from the south side on the Danube, because on the north side of the Danube actually is the border with Romania. So this is our northern border. So everything is south from there, but we have the mountains in the middle. So I'm talking about
Below
like
the map.
south from the mountains. Yeah.
I should know.
So what I discovered, and I think I told you when I had a very limited time, and I told these two incredible wine professionals, sommeliers in Bulgaria, Marin Atanasov and Jordan Rusev. They were my hosts, and they took me around. I told them, let's see 5 wineries, and they're like, no, no, no. And I'm like, why not? We're professionals. We can drink. It's like, no, this is not the way you do it in Bulgaria. And I went one of the wineries. I went where I was impressed with Nadia and her wines. It's Via Veneta. First of all, pristine, beautiful winery. But they make so many different wines from under different labels and different levels. But they had, of course, a whole variety of international varieties. But she was taking a lot of pride in her native grape varieties as well. She was making actually an excellent mavrut, and I was surprised to see a woman. It's shame on me thinking this way, but I imagine that the wine industry in Bulgaria, it's still dominated by men, and we're kind of this kind of chauvinistic, misogynist country. But here we go. I had like a fantastic winemaker who impressed me with her craft and introduced me to some fantastic wines.
That's amazing.
And I have to mention, though, here we are not allowed in California to do anything else other than wine in the winery. But many of the wineries, and including Nadia's, they had phenomenal grappa. Which is not grappa, it's rakia. This is our national drink. It's rakia, and it's proven to kill COVID-19. Or if it doesn't kill COVID-19, it will kill you.
Yeah. One of the
It's super, super high in alcohol.
yeah.
And my mom, I told you, my mom makes amazing
she
raki too.
but so it's similar to grappa. It's, I guess, every area has its own kind of.
Yeah, it's similar to grappa. The best rakias are made, and it's in Yugoslavia, Serbia.
Mhm.
I shouldn't say Yugoslavia, Serbia. It's called Slivovica. It's similar, but rakia, the best representations are made from grapes
Yeah.
or plums. But as my mom puts it, you can make it out of anything. You can make it. My mom makes an amazing one from figs. But
Interesting.
yes, oh, the figs one is so aromatic. It's amazing. And actually, I have a little bit in my freezer. But she makes it also from apples, from cherries, apricots. She says pretty much anything. She can turn into rakia.
Does it take a long time to make it, or is it pretty simple process?
No, it is on a simpler side. Yeah.
Well,
But you have to have a distiller. I told you, I asked my mom one of her birthdays, like, Mom, what would you like to have for your birthday? I usually send her money for whatever she says she wants. She said, I want a distiller. I'm like, here you go. Now she's a pro.
well, we have to have your mom on the show because I'm sure that's something that would be very interesting to see how it's made. We're always discovering these new things. So, Rakvia, Rakvia is how do you say it? Rakvia,
Rakia,
Rakia,
Rak.
yeah,
Rakia.
Rakia. That's
Yeah,
something I'm definitely,
Rakia.
especially.
I should share some with you.
I would love that, especially the fig. I love figs. I'm fanatical. Being raised in Portugal, believe me, I love figs, and very similar. I think the cultures are slightly similar, wouldn't you say? I mean, there's certain similarities there. Okay, so I have a question about this a new project you have called the Hope Farm. Could you tell us a little bit about the Hope Farm? Because it's so interesting. It's in Alabama. You were telling me about some of the things that they're doing, and I love this program. How does that work?
Okay. The Hope Farm. It's a truly enchanting, magical place.
Mhm.
It's almost finished, but basically, this is it's located first of all in a Fairhope
Uh-huh.
in South Alabama. It was my first trip there. Was in December. They hired me to consult and create their wine program. But this first about this little town, Fairhope. It's truly, I just fell in love with it. I even now I received real estate offers every day. I signed to see. I was even considering moving there. Not really, but crossed my mind.
Wow.
It's the place looks like it's a cross between Monterey and Manhattan Beach. Just little kind of beach community. It's super super cool. But what the Hope Farm is, it's an urban farm and a wine bar. But the story behind it is incredible. It's a product of a passion of a father and son, Robert and Bentley Evans.
Hmm.
The father is an absolute wine connoisseur for many years. I shared quite a few great glasses of wine with him. And the son, it's all about um, healthy living and sustainable living. And he is passionate about agriculture. So they decided to combine these passions together, and we know the best things are born out of passion to
Hmm.
create this hope farm where in the middle of the city, like a little town, they have this big facility. Just they're building now this gorgeous building that is going to be events, building in a wine bar with a fantastic wine list. I can attest to this. I have been working on it for months. And on the side, they're building this hydroponic farm. They're going to grow their own vegetables and herbs. And especially, they're going to grow like a variety of rare wild mushrooms. And it will be a true farm to table experience, but where great wine and passion and fresh produce just meet in front of your eyes.
They,
The goal is to create a communal place for everybody to meet. Just they're very involved in the community. It's a very tight, small community. It's magical. And
uh,
what I am doing there is consulting on their wine list.
mhm.
I was supposed to be there every month, but I couldn't because of COVID. Now I'm working with their new wine director, who is going to continue building what I started. And the opening is on June 1st, and I plan to be there.
Oh, that's awesome. They also have a farm to glass, which is an interesting concept as well. We're looking at their site as we're speaking. That that seems very interesting. Also, that's more like spirits and or are you also responsible on the spirit side as well? On that?
I am not, but I'm responsible for drinking the cocktails when I go there. This is my responsibility. Actually, their general manager is Kyle. It's an amazing mixologist. I told him that once it's open, because they're still doing finishing touches. The
Yeah.
farm was built from scratch. I saw it just grow in front of my eyes. It's fascinating to watch. But Kyle is mixologist. I told him I'll make a better cocktail than him. But now seeing on what they're doing on Instagram and Facebook, the cocktails they're coming from, and everything's with, they use fresh ingredients from, fresh herbs for true kind of craft cocktails. Cocktails be a whole other area that they will be amazing at.
So you actually are finding ways around the crisis. You're able to, yeah, we a lot of us got put on hold, but now that things are getting back, it seems like you're finding ways to readapt, re-engineer the way you work as a sommelier. Obviously, a lot of us are doing things online, but more than that, you're actually going to not local areas, but other states and other countries, and that's very interesting. I think that's really awesome.
you know I'm trying. Of course, I lost some business, but I'm using all this time honestly to kind of to learn a lot. I've been reading a lot and just kind of acquiring new skills, and something great has to come out of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nice to kind of stop for a moment what we're doing, kind of revamp, regroup, and maybe come up with some brilliant new ideas that we wouldn't have if this didn't happen.
Yeah,
you know
we were put on pause for a while, and we all, kind of thought about what we really wanted to do, I think, and then here we are. So I have a question for you, like because we're nearing the end of the first half. The second half, we have a very interesting guest called Julia Scavo, who is a professional port master. So she's up next, so everybody knows. And I wanted to ask you if you could define wine in one word. What would that one word be? And then please describe, a little bit about your choice for the word you chose.
Wine or Bulgarian wine?
Bulgarian wine. No, actually, scratch that. I would say wine because you do a lot more than just Bulgarian wine. So as a whole, how do you feel? Well, how would you describe it all in one word? And then why did you choose that?
Interesting. I would I haven't thought about this, but I would probably say experience.
Yeah.
Um, Wine is a very unique product that if you're passionate about it, if you learn, study about it, it just has the ability to ignite so many feelings, and you can even travel through wine. When I'm drinking Italian wine, I feel like I'm going to Italy. So it's just, wine is not just drinking a beverage, but it's about the experience. It makes a meal an experience to me. And I think the more you know about wine, the more you explore, the more true it is. You know.
It is.
So,
It is. It definitely is. And let me tell you, this was such a pleasure to have you on our show today. Give us this adventure through Bulgaria, a wonderful country that is actually going to be growing in the wine world, and to learn about what you do. And I hope we'll come back and visit again and visit this new project you have. And others that you have coming on board as well. So Nadia, and don't forget, I have to ask your mom for how she made Revishka. I hope I said that right.
yeah.
But
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You know what? It's kind of interesting. One thing it's coming out from COVID. I feel like our industry, our wine community, and wine professionals are
together,
more connected
yeah,
than ever.
yeah.
I don't know if you and I would have connected if this didn't happen. I feel like I am just building more friendships and connections. And thank you for everybody for watching. And
True.
please follow me if you don't follow me on Instagram, NP Wine. You can check my NP Song Club at uncorkedhermosa.com, or you can join also my Facebook page, NP Wine. Bertie, such a
Thank,
pleasure for having me. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to watch the second segment of this.
thank you so much for everything, your time and your information. It was wonderful. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you.
Cheers.
I didn't bring a glass. What's wrong with me? Next time.
Mavrut, baby.
I
Mavrut.
know. Thank you. All right, I'll see you.
Bye-bye.
So everybody,
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
I know, should have been better prepared. So everybody,
It's never too late. Never too late. Go grab one.
still, I've got some great Pinot. I'm going to try right now.
I know
Anyway,
you have a good port
I
too.
port. I do. I don't have the best, but speaking of the best, here it comes. So up next we have Julia. Julia Scavo is perhaps one of the best professionals that I know that can talk about port and that can explain the journey of port to a lot of people. I think that you will be fascinated by everything that she has to say. And here we go. I just want to let everybody know real quick. Julia's interview was pre-recorded because she is 9 hours ahead of us. She's in Europe, and unfortunately, this was a pre-recorded interview. Just so you know, I just putting it out there.
Destino que nos amarra, por mais que seja negado, as cordas de uma guitarra.
Welcome to the Vinely Show. I wanted to start the show today with a little bit of fado, which is Portuguese music that is well known in Portugal and in other places around the world. So that will get us into the mood. We are talking about port today. We have a wonderful guest called Julia Scavo here from France, or here with us. She's in the south of France currently, and I'm fascinated to have her as a guest. Her knowledge is very, very, very extensive, and it's quite an honor to have her. Just so you know, Julia is originally from Romania. She moved to Paris, where she followed her education in a master's in math and as well as a professional wine expert. She is the winner of the Central European Championships of 2012, third place in Best Sommelier of Europe, fifth place in the Best Sommelier of the World in 2013, third place as the Best Sommelier of Europe and Africa 2017, winner of the Masters Port 2017, but last but not least, also the Best Sommelier of Romania 2018. She's competed for the 2019 Best Sommelier of the World. Her husband is also a sommelier, also competed. They both have two wonderful children. It's Julien and Sophie. And it's such a pleasure to have with us today Julia Scavo, and giving us the insight of port wine, the history and the taste, and all the brands that are a player in this industry. So without further ado, let me please introduce Julia to you.
I'm Julia Scavo, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Birdie, for this initiative. I'm really enthusiastic about tonight.
We actually have a lot to learn. Port is something that people definitely need to learn more about. It's a wonderful fortified wine. It's something that is quite unique, and its story is even more incredible in terms of everything that is revolved around it. So I'm really happy that you're here with us, Julia.
Yes.
You and I met a couple of years ago with Derek Newport, a very well-known winemaker in Portugal, in a place called Baixada. He had a winery there called Quinta do Baixo, or maybe it was Corto Baixo. I have to go back, but for a well-known varietal called Baga grapes. I'm very interested in knowing about how Porto is made. I'm not sure if this is part of the equation or not, but any kind of knowledge you'll give us is fascinating. Your husband is as well, like you, a very well-known sommelier. He's practicing for the 2019 Monaco Sommelier Studies Awards, correct? And he has
international competition in 2019.
That's right. And you also did that, correct?
Yes, yeah, we were the first couple to do that together.
You did. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
we there's a lot. There's a. It's always better as a couple, I think.
Yeah,
uh,
we were against each other, but we went together to the competition.
that's fantastic. And you
Yeah,
both have two kids, Sophie and
yeah,
Julien.
yeah.
And just to ask you, I mean, how's this quarantine going? Besides, everything being upside down, how is it for you guys in France?
Well, like for everybody, it was really upside down, and it started so quickly, and we had to get in very quickly, especially concerning my case because I'm an educator, so education must go on, and we had to continue with homeschooling for all the students that we have for many institutes where I practice because I'm a freelance educator. I'm a self-employed, but I work with many institutes, and among which I also have some national education institutes. So it's very serious stuff, and courses must go on because all the students have exams by the end of the year. So we need to evaluate them, we need to assess them very properly and without exams, because either they pass online or they have just evaluations, and it's really serious. So concerning my situation, I continued working. I actually esteem that I worked twice because I had to shift from a face-to-face system to e-learning, which is very new to me, and to get updated with Zoom, with Skype, with Discord and other systems. And students also had to shift to this kind of system as well, which is very virtual, especially when it comes to tastings and practical tests. So we really had to adapt, and it's also a double work because we had to grade so many exams that we do not do in normal time, because we had to gather in a very short period a lot of grades to assess the students. So it was very stressful, both for students and for us teachers and educators, and for the system that made a lot of pressure, which is normal. And for my husband, it was quite an unusual situation because he's always been working since he got into the Société de Bain de Mer, which is the Monte Carlo Resort SBM, a very important society in Monte Carlo, with hospitality, with catering, with Michelin stars restaurants. So stopping and blocking that like this from day to tomorrow, it was so incredible. And with two kids, with homeschooling for the elder, with nothing actually to do for the second. And it's so important when you are in kindergarten, because you learn with socializing, and you just find yourself alone without your fellows, without your teachers. It was the first year of kindergarten for him, so he was very enthusiastic in the beginning, and now everything stopped. So I think it's very virtual for him too. And the elder one, she got so jealous on his brother because he's got nothing to do, and she's got all the homeschooling, and it's actually not just homeworking, it's really teaching her. Meanwhile, I teach my students, my husband also taught her, so it was a upside down situation. And well, hopefully we had things to do, because I think it's even harder for people that don't have things to do. It's so annoying to stay at home, and people working in the hospitality business that are so active and that need to do something, and even sommelier that cannot go and taste in the vineyard. This was a period where we had a lot of fairs as well to visit,
That's right.
and everything was cancelled. So
Uh,
no, very unusual situation, very peculiar times.
think we're all looking forward to a good big restart. Just pretend that this year never happened and just start all
Yeah,
over again next year. What's going to be interesting is, however, what's going to happen in the harvest season, at least north of the
yeah,
equator in September. It's going to be very interesting to see how that turns
indeed.
around. But I have so many questions for you. If you don't mind, I'm going to go jump right into it.
First,
That people know, a sommelier isn't just a wine expert. To be honest with you, a sommelier is also a variety of things. They can be an expert in beer, and scotch, vodka, gin, brandy, and many other things as well. Um, One of the fascinating things about this world of wine and spirits that we live in is that they are different interpretations or different ways of analyzing things, no matter where you are in the world, and maybe because of the fact that your palate is different, the weather, you name it. So really, these perspectives and this point of view, if you will, that you'll see on the show and others, is that very personal to that person. It doesn't mean that it's the same for you. Just a little note out there that, everybody has their own taste. Everybody is a wine expert, if you will, because it's how you perceive it to be. So this is just a little educational gateway to that. So Julia, one of the things that I wanted to ask you about in being a master of port in 2018, being a master
17.
of port wine, I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you a few questions. It's 18, correct? In 18.
17 actually.
17, sorry, 17.
17, yeah.
Uh,
Sorry.
an incredible accomplishment amongst other things like that you also have. But I also wanted to ask you, in port being such a fascinating thing, what in your mind is that one attribute that port does in a dinner table or perhaps in an environment where you are with friends that is the strongest? What do you feel perhaps is port all about? Give us a little rundown, if you don't mind.
Yes, first of all, it's a very versatile wine, and it's one which is filled with culture and emotion. I think emotion is one of the words in culture because it is filled with history, the beauty of the landscapes, the fact that you really get in this very old geology. You feel it everywhere when you are in the Douro Valley. You smell it almost. It's so incredible, and because geology is related to the kind of plants that grow there, and they're so specific to this place, and also related to the climate, so it makes a whole universe, and together with the varietals that are so varied, so diverse, and also when we think of all these places that are so filled with history, because if you pass by the Douro River, and sometimes you see small chapels where the people on the boats and the barcos chabelos used to pray. So you imagine that those people didn't always suppose that they would get down to the estuary, down to Porto and to Gaia. So you really feel this vivid emotion. And also when you see all the azulejos in many places, even in railway stations like in Pinhao, so you can see history in those azulejos. I think they were also created for people that at that moment didn't really read, so they could imagine history, they could dream this history through all these images, and it's so artistic and it's so picturesque. And this is, I think it's a whole. And there's also, of course, when we're talking about production, there is inspiration, but there's also chemistry, there's also science, so many things related to the physics of the wine and the chemistry, which will then be connected to our inner chemistry whenever we taste it. And there's a big connection between all these elements. This is, I think, a complete wine, because this is what attracted me when I came into the wine universe, when I quit mathematics and sciences, because I actually love science. I love the rigor of mathematics, but I also had one foot into the artistic world. I used to be in literature before going to mathematics in high school. So my first steps were with literature and also with music, with ballet dancing. So I think that everything combined gets us to wine, or wine has all these attributes, and especially port wine has all these attributes. We can say that about other wines. Of course, champagne is very rich in history. Of course, other fortified wines have a very rich history, but I think at the scale of the Douro Valley and what port means, it's difficult to find a comparison.
So true. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, so that people know where port is from and how it came about, I'm going to step back a little bit and kind of explain or have you help us understand the roots of port wine. It's one of the first regions, I believe, that was actually nominated as its own DOC. If you could explain that and how the English were involved and perhaps the transportability of port, that is something absolutely fascinating. So if I could now you kind of circle back and go to the beginning of all this, tell us a little bit about that story, if you don't mind.
Of course, yes. If we have to get back to the beginning, of course, we can even get back to the Bronze Era, because discoveries have been excavated and they could find traces of the existence of Vitis vinifera and of the existing of the vine in this area and in Portugal on the whole. And Portugal is one of the I would say, of the cores for Vitis vinifera that really stayed so pristine, so pure after all. Because when the ice age came, we could define this kind of cores for Vitis vinifera, and one should be with Portugal. There are others in the Orient, and it was so isolated because there's this mountainous part that really preserved this heritage of varietals, of what all these varietals will become in Portugal. This is why we can find such a great variety of grapes, and they're so unique to Portugal. So we can even go that far down to the Bronze Era, and of course then with the Romans, because they had their positive influence like everywhere in south of Europe, in all the Mediterranean basin, even if we're not in the Mediterranean basin anymore. And they called Portugal Portucalensis because this area was actually the Portucalensis, and this is where Portugal took its name from. And the Portucalensis became a real center for wine, for winemaking, and even the Moorish domination couldn't destroy that, because when the Moorish came in the Iberic Peninsula after the Guadalete battle in the 8th century, of course, they destroyed part of the vineyards, they taxed a lot of wine, they taxed a lot of grape production, and maybe used the alcohol just for sanitary use. But there are evidences that they still preserve this area, the core of the Portucalensis, because they could perceive taxes, and taxes were very elevated, both on the grape production and on the wine. And it's the beginning of the Quranic era, so we can have evidences that those people, they were at the beginning of the interdiction, and they still consumed, nobles consumed, courtesans consumed wine and other alcoholic beverages, because it was just in the beginning. And we have evidence for that, and this is why they preserved the area. And Portugal is also the first to get rid of the Moorish, because in 1139, with Alfonso Henriques, they became a true nation. So they got rid of the 5 kings, the Moorish kings, and this is how they became a nation. I think it's one of the oldest monarchy, the oldest nation that was recognized by the Pope in 1162. And they had their own flag illustrated with these Moorish castles that were taken by Alfonso Henriques. And there's a whole significance of this Christian inspiration of the blood of Christ, because the Christ came as a revelation to Henriques, to Alfonso Henriques on the cross. So we have all this inspiration of the, let's say, holy blood, which is the wine. And this is how maybe Alfonso Henriques won against the Moorish. So this is what the legends say, of course. And then what's very important, because you mentioned the British and the Englishmen, it's this alliance that came by 1386 with the Treaty of Windsor. And João of Portugal married to Philippa of Lancaster. And this alliance actually was not only a blood alliance, but also a commercial alliance. So this is the first treaty, and it was signed in Oporto, and they got married in Oporto too. So just to mention their importance, they are the parents of Henry the Navigator. So
Oh,
their third
interesting.
child, Harry the Navigator, he wasn't a prince to reign because he was the third. But he did so much for Portugal. He inspired all those navigators, and in his memory, our costumes for the Confraria do Vinho do Porto, because I'm and Bruno also, we are both members of the Confraria do Vinho do Porto. We have the same robes and the same dresses like Harry the Navigator, and the hat, of course. So maybe I can show that to you a bit later in the video. I don't have it here next to me, but
No,
I can show at least the hat, which is really the one inspired by Harry the Navigator.
that would be fantastic. Actually, I think I have a
Yeah.
picture. You were kind enough to send us a picture, and I'm going to post it
Yes, I
so
sent you
everybody
a
can see
picture,
it.
of course, with this red garnet color, even purple, a bit purple tainted color of the robe and the black hat. So this is quite linked to what port will become, because at that moment, of course, we don't talk about port wine. We have just Portuguese wine, but it starts voyaging, it starts traveling with all these navigators. And there's another moment, it is under Oliver Cromwell, the Puritan, who actually banned everything that could come from the enemies being Spain, being France. So this is when wines like sherry become kind of anathema. This is when the French claret, the Bordeaux, starts getting down, and this is by the period which will actually be just before the end of the affair between British and Claret. So Oliver Cromwell by 1654 will make another treaty, another commercial alliance, the Westminster Treaty. So this is again very important. And then there will be the moment when Colbert in 1670, by 1670, 1667 actually, will forbid anything that came from England, so meaning all the tissues, all the things that France could import. And meanwhile, he tripled the taxes on French claret. So, of course, the British boycott the French claret and went and searched it elsewhere. And elsewhere was the closest that could be was in Portugal. Madeira was very far. They had some adventures with Marsala, but Sicily was very far and it was more inland, so they had to pass by Gibraltar. So this was very difficult. So the closest and the most accessible for the export was, of course, Portugal and Oporto. But they didn't come precisely to Oporto first. They came to Monção, they came to Viana di Castello, they came to all this area that is more associated today to the Vinho Verde. So we couldn't actually speak about port in the first place. It was red Portugal. So it was a quite rustic, quite dark, quite harsh wine, quite tannic and not fortified. It was dry, it was fermented dry. And it wasn't actually what British appreciated most, because when you think about French claret, it was a very clear wine, a kind of darker rosé or something intermediate between rosé and red. So not very tannic, quite acidic, because Bordeaux was a kind of marsh at that moment. And when the war with France burst in 1689, they were obliged by patriotism to drink something else than what they liked. So they started drinking this red Portugal, even if they didn't really appreciate it. And by this time, they thought this wine won't keep up to London, to Bristol, to wherever they brought it, to the colonies, even to India, this kind of Vinho da Roda, in the same way as the Madeira. And this is where they started putting brandy and spirit inside. And at first, the wine was fermented to dryness, and then it was fortified up to about 15, 16 degrees of alcohol. This is what we can find by historical evidences. It was a dry, rustic, quite harsh wine, tannic, very red, very deep, and it was fortified after the whole fermentation. And the first mention, I would say, of port fortified as a sweet wine should be by 1678, and this is actually the first mention of the word port wine, Vinho do Porto. Two merchants from Liverpool came somewhere to Lamego, and an abbot served them a kind of potion which was very sweet and very luscious and very rich as well, and this is supposed to be fortified port during fermenting. So it's a technique they supposed to have from Spanish monks, and this abbot might have learned it by contacts with Spanish monks. And this is the first mention of port as a wine. So port takes the name of Oporto, of the city of Oporto, and this is a period when so by 1678 port becomes a favorite wine for the British, because Portuguese lower the taxes. They even make a kind of exchange between bacalhau, so cod fish, and tissues. They really exchange this wine for other merchandise coming from England. And this is why in 1703 Lord John Methuen will make a treaty, a very important commercial treaty that will include all this very low taxation system and this kind of a very free exchange between two countries. So this is the third important treaty, the Methuen Treaty in 1703. And this will encourage actually a very consistent trade between the two countries, especially concerning the port wine, but it will also encourage the fraud, because British will be more and more interested into the port business. They will settle, some of them will settle in Oporto, some will still be in England but will trade the port, and Portuguese will kind of take advantage of the situation, because if British come in Oporto and make a kind of a state in the state, they will try to take advantage of the situation, and will start blending the wine from the region with wines from south of Portugal, and then put some other kind of spirits inside, mainly spirits distilled in the colonies like Brazil. So maybe it's cane sugar or other spirits. We don't have really evidence about that. They also can put some sugar, some cane sugar. Another technique was the baga de sabugueiro, which is elderflower, elderberry actually. They're very tannic, they're very colored. These berries are really black, and they give a lot of color and tannins and structure. And some even speak about bullock blood and a lot of legendary stuff. But let's stick to the elderberry. This is something which is really attested by evidences. And if the trade goes up for a moment, by 1740 it starts getting down, and the prices by pipash, by barrel, will start getting down as well, and it will really get like 5 times lower than it used to be by the beginning of this commercial trade. And this is where all the conscious producers from the Douro start being worried, and they gather around the Prime Minister of Portugal, Sebastião João de Carvalho e Melo, better known as Marquês do Pombal. Because actually first time he wasn't the Marquês do Pombal, he became Marquês in 1770.
That's right.
He also became a Count of Oiras, but he was the Prime Minister. And we should know that by this time it was a very unclear period, because in 1755 there was a big earthquake in Lisbon, and Pombal reconstructed Lisbon from the ground. And we should also know that José I was the king, became completely crazy after this earthquake, because he was very shocked. He was very stressed by this earthquake. He didn't want to sleep in his castle anymore. He built a kind of tent outside in the garden, and he passed all his life in this kind of tent because he was really shocked, and he became completely disabled in his power as a king. And Pombal, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, took the power. He became the Iron Marquis, and he wanted to make Portugal a self-sufficient country, a self-sufficient economy. He established a lot of monopolistic powers, just like Salazar did some centuries later. And being so powerful, producers gathered together with him, and he said, okay, we're going to make a kind of monopoly for the port production. The Companhia Real or Companhia Geral das Vinhas do Alto Douro, and he actually created this first DOC, this first demarcated region, the Região Demarcado Douro, and it was from Barqueiros up to Pinhao, because the Douro wasn't known after Pinhao. It wasn't able to navigate. There was a big granite stone in the middle of the river. So it was just between the beginning of the Douro Valley, known today, Barqueiros, and Pinhao. And he also demarcated the plots. He planted between 1758 and 1761 like 355 posts or granite stones called pombalin that we still can see today in some vineyards, to notice those vineyards that are able to provide wine for the British, and they call them the Feitoria plots, and the other was called the Ramos, because they were very simple plots, and people had to advertise this wine by putting a kind of bush in front of the gate. So this is the Ramos, the Ramo. This is why we can say good wine doesn't need bush to advertise. So Feitoria was a good wine for the British, and the others were for the domestic market, or even for commerce with the northern countries like the Netherlands or Scandinavians. And what's interesting is that by this moment, the white port will somehow disappear from the view, even if Pombal, because we know that there are evidence of white varietals and reds, both of them. And there are places like the Altos next to Favaios, to Alijo, that were for the Vinho Branco de Feitoria. And then actually, because practice is like putting elderberry in any kind of port, either white or red, was still in use. Pombal will uproot all the elderberry trees and will uproot uproot the white varieties. So this is where port will really become red, as the British will start producing it. So this is where it really turns into this kind of deep colored, very luscious and very strong tannic, and also generous wine that British enjoyed and will become the prototype of the vintage port. Well, a lot of important moments will follow. So this is a monopolistic period. Then Queen Maria, Joseph's daughter, will banish the Marquis. So she will kind of liberalize the market and enlarge a bit this area. Even if it will still be a cadastral, a kind of demarcated region, stipulated by the Marquis on the 10th of September in 1756. So this is why we celebrate Port Day, International Port Day, is on the 10th of September. So this is very important, because every 10th of September there are a lot of festivities in Oporto and in the area. And we also try to remember port wine every 10th of the month. So each month we can celebrate port every 10th of the month. So in the memory of this 10th of September 1756, which is the first system of appellation, because even if you mention Tokaj or Chianti that were demarcated in the same period, it was only a territory demarcation. Port was also about quality, about what kind of types of wines, either Feitoria or Ramos, to produce. There was also a monopoly on the aguardiente, on the spirit they could acquire to fortify the wine. Also a kind of protection for the authenticity of the product, so we could not blend it with other wines coming from other areas, from Algarve or from Ribatejo or wherever people could get some wine to blend with it. So this is a real DOC process, a real PDO process, and it's very innovative by those times. And
question for
yeah,
you. You mentioned aguardiente, which is hot water, or something that every country kind of has its own interpretation of that. When did aguardiente come into play? Because I know that at some period the English also tried to use whiskey and other things like that to go through the process. But when did aguardiente happen? And then if it is part of the appellation, does it come from Lorignan, like the south? How does that go into the whole process?
Yeah, so in the beginning, as you said, other kind of spirits were used. I mentioned sugar cane, you mentioned whiskey. We do not know because they used what they actually had in use. So we think that it was first fortified, as I said, in 1678, but I don't think it was the most appropriate use of the aguardiente at that moment. Then during this fraud period, port was fortified, but just to make it stronger, because in the opinion of the British at the time, port had to have the sweetness of the sugar from Brazil. This is what they said. It had to have the spices of India. It had to have power and richness like gunpowder, and it also had to be very deep like ink. This is a kind of phrase I could find in many historical evidence, and this is where Portuguese played upon the words, because actually when British said, okay, it should be sweet like Brazil, spicy like India, having the fire's force of the gunpowder and be as black as ink, it was just a metaphor. And actually Portuguese played upon the words, and they actually put some cane sugar aguardiente, they put some cane sugar inside, some elderberry to make it inky, and maybe some other stuff to make it, I don't know, spicy or aromatic, botanicals or whatever. So we know that they used a spirit to fortify it. But I think by evidence I could read, port as we know it today was fortified as we know it today by 1820. So between Pombal and 1820, it was very obscure, so we don't really know how it was fortified. It was mainly fortified to keep on the road to England or to the colonies. So I think it was more by the end of the fermenting process, or even after the fermenting process. This is for sure that it was fermented after it was fortified after fermenting to dryness in the beginning. But as we get close to 1820, we have evidence of vintages. So we can even have descriptions and comments. We recorded an event with George Sandeman tasting some wines in Tavora Varosa and speaking about great vintages from the end of the 18th century. Then we know that Vice Admiral Nelson signed his strategy for Trafalgar battle with his Nelson touch, so just dipping his finger in vintage port and drawing the map of the strategy on a table. So as we talk about vintages or other vintages like the Jubilee vintage, like the Comet vintage, and the very important vintages from the beginning of the 19th century, the profile of the vintage gets closer to what we know today. And we have evidence that it was sweet and it was fortified. So at that moment, you're right, they used spirits coming from the Lisbon area, from the ancient Extremadura, from Lourinhã, maybe from Ribatejo. So the brandy was very diverse, and it came from Portugal. And this ended in 1907 when João Franco actually imposed the use of an external spirit from the region. So and the wines from the region couldn't be distilled anymore, and also they got a monopoly on the spirit. So they sourced the spirit where they wanted and where they had interest to source it. So this will end little by little at this period. And during very difficult times, like during the wars, like during Salazar, there were even moments when they used other sources. So we could get evidence that there were also spirits coming from other European countries, even from Germany. There was a big scandal as well in the 70s, just before the twilight of the Salazar regime, with vintages like 72, 73, 74. So it's just the end of the period when, taking advantage of the political climate, producers imported some Yugoslavian industrial alcohol. So this was a big problem because Casa do Douro, who got the monopoly on the spirits, was implied in the scandal. And of course, I think if it wasn't for this political climate, this would have been a very big shock in the port industry. But I think the port industry was already very shocked by the political climate, so they really passed that harsh moment and the very embarrassing moment for the port industry. And I think when producers got really conscious about the impact of the spirit, it's in the 90s when they experimented with other spirits sourced even in France, because as I said, it actually got free. This monopoly of the Casa do Douro started to end, and Portugal entering the European community freed its commerce, so it started sourcing alcohol wherever they wanted. And one of the best sources was France and the cognac, and the family Bernard, which provide very good quality eau de vie, aguardente, and the aguardente should be 77%. So this is very specific and very different from other fortified wines, where it's normally fortified with a neutral spirit around 96 degrees. So at 96 degrees, you don't have much impact on your fortified wine. So even if your aguardente is not very high in quality, the alcohol is completely neutral, it's completely without any aroma, without any aldehydes, and you don't have that much impact. So if you use it at 77, especially on wines that have such an incredible structure like vintages, because you have tannins, you have sugar, you have a very sophisticated aroma profile, you really need to have a very positive impact of your spirit on the fortified wine, and you need to have very good aldehydes and very good esters to have a positive impact on your port. If you do standard categories like standard whites, like even standard rosé now, because we have this category, even if we got tawnies and rubies of a standard category, the impact is less noticeable. But when we're talking about big vintages where the balance is so incredible, the aguardente is very important, is essential, and its quality is essential. So by the 90s, they took conscience about this process, and I think we start noticing that in the 2000, where most of the producers will source high quality aguardente, and mainly in France and the big sheepers in Cognac region too.
And then, so aguardente is, in a way, it's a brandy, correct? It's a form of
Yes.
brandy. But obviously, in Portugal, they can't call it that. But is it used to such a degree that they've actually perfected the process from one specific area of Portugal, or are they able to bring in, brandy from other places, like you mentioned? But
Yes.
in the brand that you're talking about today, the more modern ones, is it more widespread, or how is that controlled?
They can bring it from wherever they want,
Oh, okay.
except the Douro. So it's forbidden to use. It's very incredible because it's since João Franco in 1907, it's forbidden to distill the wines of the region and to use the alcohol to fortify port. Yeah, this was actually because they instaured a monopoly. Otherwise, producers, because we're talking 1907, we are before 1926, when Villanova de Gaia became the entreposto, and all the ports were supposed to stay in Villanova de Gaia for maturing. So before 1926, it was possible to mature your port at the Quinta. Which also became possible after 1986 again. But at that moment, small producers could use their own distilled alcohol, their own aguardente, and they couldn't. The monopoly, the state monopoly, couldn't master that process because everybody could use how much brandy they wanted, distill how much brandy they wanted, and use it for 45. So when they started controlling that, it was compulsory that the aguardente comes from another region than the Douro. And especially that in the 40s, when the beneficio system arrived, and the Casa do Douro was both the master of the beneficio at that moment and the monopoly of the aguardente, there was a very obvious connection between that, because Casa do Douro gave the quantity of beneficio, which is basically the quantity of aguardente you can get by means of terroir definition, of course. But actually they control that in a very obvious way. They gave the quantity and they knew where to source this aguardente, and maybe they took some commissions by the passage, because as I mentioned, the scandal in the 70s, just after the scandal, and Casa do Douro was implied in this scandal, the price of the aguardente Casa do Douro provided doubled. So it was a moment where they took advantage of the situation and they doubled the price of the aguardente, and they were the only supplier of aguardente. What happened afterwards is that they were implied in other scandals, taking some shares in the Royal Oporto Company, which is a big cooperative, historical cooperative based on the Compagnia Geral, and this is a big conflict of influence, because they were both in the beneficio and they also had shares in the production. So this led them to a big scandal. This also showed that they had a lot of debts, and by 2015 Casa do Douro disappeared actually from as an actor, as an institution. The beneficio system went to the IVDP, the Instituto do Vinho do Douro e do Porto, and this was actually first thought in 2003. The Instituto do Vinho do Douro and Porto became IVDP, not only IVP as it used to be, and they started taking some of the attributes of the Casa do Douro, and eventually in 2015 everything go to the IVDP, and in the scripts of the Casa do Douro there's only the cadastro, but they don't have any power anymore, so everything is finished, and of course the monopoly is finished. So now everybody can source their spirit where they want, except from the Douro region, of course, because it's still forbidden to source it inland and to distill the wines from the Douro for this purpose. And they can source it wherever they want, as long as it's a 77 degrees grape spirit. It's neutral, well, neutral as it can be for a 77 degrees spirit, non-aged, so it's a colorless grape spirit at 77 degrees, but it can come from any country. I think it's restricted to Europe, like all the beverages, because we cannot mix with other legislation than the European Union legislation. And as I said, a lot of shippers and a lot of good producers source it in France. It's a very good source for alcohol, for spirit, for aguardiente, and cognac is a region that comes first because the quality and the know-how for distilling is, of course, historical.
So this is such an interesting wine because you've got this intrinsic connection to England, and then you have, it went on boats across various parts of the world through the colonies, and still today perhaps one of the most well-known drinks, at least in its category. And and it's just, I have to ask you, because some people are going to wonder, what are some of the good brands that we should know? What are, something that may or may not be as commercial, or what have you tasted lately that you would recommend somebody to look for it?
Well, there are, of course, you mentioned the English, so they did a lot of good for port and for the wines of the region. They were implied in the production from the beginning historically. They actually gave the trend and the style. They installed their commerce, their Martin system in Oporto, and their lodges in Gaia, and they also created this institution, which is the factory house, right, by 1785, 1786, and this was the institution for the British shippers, and a very exclusivist. No Portuguese house could penetrate, no woman as well. It was only by the time with Natasha Bridges from Taylor's that she could penetrate the association and take part into the meetings. So yes, they did a lot for port, especially for vintage, especially for the ruby categories. Now they are getting connected with the tawny categories as well, so producing a lot of aged indication tawnies, and also some single harvest. Even they don't mention the Colheita name. I'm going to come back later about the categories. So more in the ruby sector, and of course in the vintage sector. And to mention, of course, the brands, the big brands, and I will also get to the small producers too. Of course, I would mention we have.
I know you've got some bottles, probably.
Yeah, some bottles here. So I don't have a Croft here, but I would like to mention Croft because Croft and Wars, they both of them they are the oldest shippers. So. Kopke is the oldest, globally speaking. Kopke is a German name, a German brand, and in 1638 they were the first shipper. But from the British shippers, I think it's important to mention Croft and Whereas they belong to two groups nowadays. Croft to the Flatgates and Whereas to the Symingtons, and they were the first British shippers in 1670 for Whereas, and in 1678. So the name port is from the same year as the beginning of Croft, actually. And then another great name, of course, is Taylor's. So Taylor's have got two representative wines from theirs. So Taylor's was actually Joe Presley in 1692. So we are also in the beginning. And of course, what's tremendous with Taylor's is the vintages. So I have here a fascinating 1985.
Wow,
you can note the bottle. Yeah. It's a origin label, of course, and so this is what they're best known for the vintages, with elegancy, backbone, but elegancy, especially when it comes to the single Quinta Vargelas, and now the old vines from Vergellas, which is likely to be the Margaux of the port, if we can make a comparison with the Bordeaux. So very elegant, very airy. It's more of a north-facing area, so it becomes very fresh, and it's very good for the global climate changing that we experiment nowadays. So vintages with tailors, they belong to the Flatgate group as well, and also very innovative, changing, because I said British were very linked, very connected to the red categories, but they also produced the first dry category of white. This is the cheap dry. Started in 1934, so they're the first to experiment with a dry white port. So fermented as close to dryness as possible and fortified by the end of the fermentation. Now it's actually an extra dry category, so even drier. And it's the prototype for...
What's chip dry? How do you define chip drying?
Yes, dry is very peculiar to explain that, because it's a matter of density more than sugar, because you can be actually you can be extra dry if you're up to 20 grams of sugar and dry up to 40 grams, but you still have sugar, so it's not completely dry. Palatably meaning, but they calculate it in terms of density. So the density of this this port is close to zero. So as you go more than zero, wines become denser because of the sugar. As you get down to zero and downer than zero, they are closer to dryness. So actually an extra dry port is a port with about zero of density, and the balance make it so that you perceive it in a dry way. So you're gonna have some sugar, but then even if you don't have a very high acidity, you can have some phenolics, because in this case they also use lagarish to macerate it, to make some skin contact, and this is which brings some phenolics, and the phenolics will enhance salivation, and you will have some freshness perception, and also the finish is going to be very dry. You're not going to have something sweet on the finish. You're going to get something on the bitter side, on the zesty character, and this makes it a perfect product to make the P&T, which is the port tonic cocktail with tonic and with some lemon slice, sometimes some mint as well, or some rosemary. There are other versions nowadays. So this is how they marketed it. You can drink it on its own as a single drink, but you can also mix it. And this was a big innovation with tailors, even if, of course, they are very well known for vintages. And since a couple of years, they also make single harvests, because they discovered some very old stocks and some dating and predating phylloxera. They discovered some barrels predating phylloxera, so they released some single harvests that are really tremendous. And but okay, the focus is vintage and this curiosity about the dry, the cheap dry, as they called it. Really, it's not bone dry, but it's really on the line, is really focused and has this dry finish.
Yes.
Let
people know that Xylosfera was a disease that spread across Europe, in case people don't know, and decimated the wine industry for many, many years. Only a few little pockets survived. Actually, another one in Portugal near Sintra called Colares, which the sandy soils of that area were very beautiful. But so that people know, the salvation to the wine industry was the American stem, correct? When it was brought from the U.S. over to Europe to get that recultivated. So just so that people know, that would be a different show, I'm sure. But sorry, I interrupted.
No problem. No, it's very important to mention that. And in Portugal, in Douro, actually, it bursted by 1868 in Govigno. And what's interesting with port is that it was a wine that lived on its stocks. So they survived better during phylloxera because they survived on their stocks, and they could even sell some of their stocks, which unfortunately could get blended in other wines in France or wherever. So this was a moment of fraud as well, which encouraged all the PDO concepts from the beginning of the 19th century. This is why a lot of European countries like France, like Spain, Portugal installed this demarcation system in the beginning of the 19th century to face this frauds generated by phylloxera. And since you mentioned Kolaresh and this fantastic Ramishko vines that thrive on the sandy beaches just south from Lisbon, yeah. There's another spot, this time in Douro, precisely, which is a Nacional. It's a plot, it's a very small plot, like 600 vines in 5 terraces, and it belongs to Quinta do Noval. So just 5 terraces of, well, they're not all pre-phylloxera. They were planted, most of them, some of them survived. They were planted in 1874 without grafting. So it was a big bet at that moment, because they still bet on planting without grafting. And it's a miracle that they survive, because that's not a sandy soil, it's pure slate. Incredible. It's very poor. But you know, it's not obvious that phylloxera cannot come in this area, and still they are ungrafted. So not pre-phylloxera. Maybe there are some vines that are pre-phylloxera, but they are ungrafted and very old, because 1874 is very close to phylloxera, which was 1868. And Nacional is, of course, one of the greatest brands for port. It's actually what put port, I think, in the iconic segment, in the high end, and more than that, iconic, because when the vintage 1931 of Nacional was discovered by connoisseurs, by critics, and it was so admired by the whole critic, it really boosted this concept of iconic port, because 1931 it's a tremendous vintage, is a monumental vintage, but very few declared it, because we are just after the crisis of 1929 and the Big Depression, and like every crisis moment, people didn't think actually of declaring. They still had stocks, unsold stocks, and very few declared in 1931, among which, of course, Quinta do Noval, there's Newport as well, there's Ramos Pinto. So very, very few declarations for a tremendous vintage like 1931. And this is why when it was discovered some decades afterwards, it got that mad in terms of prestige, in terms of price. Nacional was ungrafted vines. So, and then it was more or less discovered, and a lot of great vintages followed, because since the 70s and after the liberation of the Salazar regime, a lot of great vintages were declared. And when we go to 1991 and 1994, there were also 2 big vintages for Nacional that brought it in front of the scene for the port as an iconic. Yeah, so this was a beautiful story. We visited the Quinta. It's really beautiful. You have white stone walls that you can see as you approach Pinhao, and this terraces are really tremendous, and the vines are survivors. They're really very, very old vines that survive, that thrive in this slaty, very poor terraced land. And when you get to Noval, to Quinta do Noval, you have a way through a kind of high trellised vine, and you make like I don't know, like 1 kilometer to arrive to the mansion, and these vines were used for domestic use and for the workers, to make a wine for the workers. So there's a lot of history in this quinta, and it's a quinta that still stayed in the family, even if it belongs to AXA Millésime nowadays, but it still gets this family spirit. So family linked, and they were among the first sheepers as well, because they can be considered as sheepers, not exclusively producers. They have Quinta do Noval, their vines, and they also have some merchant activities with Noval, and they are the first to transfer their lodge from Gaia to the Douro, because they had a big fire in 1981, which destroyed the whole stocks in Gaia. And since then, they came back actually to the Douro next to Pinhao, and they built a super technological lodge, and of course the vinification center. Everything is temperature controlled, so there's no Douro bake, this phenomenon that you can notice in the Douro if you mature your ports in the Douro, because you don't have this fresh Atlantic air to come into your cellar. So everything is actually, they have the perfect conditions, even if they are in the heart of the Douro. So a very, very important quinta. And what's very interesting with them is that they make very regulate declarations. So they kind of declare every year, but those that are not worth declaring. It's like a chateau in Bordeaux, it's like a super Tuscan. So they make all the years, except those that are really accidents. And they just declared 2018. They are among the first to show their declarations, but they also declared 17, 16, 15, of course, which are most of them unanimous vintages, especially 16 and 17, but also 14, 13, 12, of course 11, which is tremendous. So during this last decade, they have all the panel of vintages for their classic vintage. So it's another brand that we should notice.
That's definitely something to put on the books. I got a question though. And Portugal, just like Napa, was affected by huge fires last year, I believe.
Yes.
Does that affect
last year and previously too? Yeah.
Year too. Did that affect the region of Porto? And did it affect the taste that you know of in subsequent vindimas or in subsequent harvest?
Yes, because when you talk about Napa and Australia as well, they have smoke taint getting into the grapes. Well, it also depends on when it happened. I remember in 2017 there was a very big fire as well that really affected the Douro too. Well, it mostly affected plots that were close to the forests, and unfortunately for the wines as well, plots that were mortorious. So these were very ancient plots that predated phylloxera, and because of the steep terraces that were unpracticable anymore, they stopped using them after phylloxera. So most of these plots that burned was unused plots or plots that were close to the forests, but there was affected, of course, the whole industry was affected, but I don't have any evidence on the taste. 2017, it's a big vintage, is a great vintage. Mm-hmm. It was a big shock, of course, for the workers, for the people in the industry. There were numerous deaths as well, so it was a catastrophe, a human catastrophe as well. But I don't have any evidence of this smoke taint that could influence the taste of the wines. As far as I could get through these last years, when we had particularly hot years, because 17 was a particularly hot, very dry. 18 was quite in the same character. They had a 40 degrees period in July, August that was really, really prolonged. So yeah, very, very hot. And some spots in 17, for instance, and even in 18, they got. We went to Niports in 18 in August, and the week before we got there, they told us they had 54 degrees on the ground, so it's incredible on the slate, and and still when we got there, it was still very, very hot. Yeah, so 2 particularly hot vintages with 17 and 18, more balanced on 2016. I would also like to mention another English brand, which is Grams, and we also have a vintage if Bruno wants to get it out of the cellar, or because this is as you can see, this is a very original packaging, especially for a port. This is a new release from Grams. It's not what they're particularly known for. They're also very known for, of course, for vintages. And Bruno is grabbing a bottle of vintage from the cellar. A tremendous 1970 vintage, which was a mythical year. It's a immortal vintage as well.
Is it?
So still waiting. Yes.
Interesting.
Immortal. Well, a matter to say about port, of course, but it can. I think it can easily survive us. Yeah. But we're still waiting for it. Yes.
That's amazing.
And this is a kind of original product that I discovered recently. It's medium dry white port, made from Malvasia fina and Moscatel Gallego. So quite aromatic grapes, and it's low temperature fermented to make it really aromatic, really pungent and very pronounced in terms of the nose. It really gets some flowery and herbal and a hint of muscat-like on the nose, and it's very refreshing despite the fact it's a medium dry, so it's not a dry, and it's a perfect pre-dinner port as well as a good mixology product, not only for the P&T but other cocktails and even exotic cocktails can be encouraged with such a beverage. So a very, very interesting product, and the packaging, I think, with a premiumization of the gin industry, I think this is a very good thing for port and for white port to really grab some market shares, especially with youngsters and millennials and Z generation and so on, just to encourage them coming to port, because if they use port for the cocktails and the pre-dinner, they might afterwards get to other categories. So I think it's a very good strategy and nice to encourage.
I've been drinking
I would to Ramos Pinto, because we talked about English, but I would also like to talk about Portuguese brands. From Pinto, I have a Lagrima. They're also they're very well known for townies, but just and vintages too lately. Lagrima from Ramos Pinto. I would say if there is a brand that is particularly linked to this very sweet category, this might be Ramos Pinto. I didn't bring the one with the Christ image, because there's one with the Christ, the Lacrima Cristo, Christi, with the Christ image, because Lagrima comes from the tears, so it's so dense and so deep that it's just like tears, and these are the sweetest categories of port. This Lagrima das Damas is made from the century anniversary of the house, and it's a bit lighter in style than the Lacrima Christi, but very enjoyable. Especially this is a port to appreciate with all the Portuguese desserts, like the pastéis de nata, like the bolos, like all this egg and sugar pastries, doces de convento, very, very enjoyable at the end of the meal, even with fruit salads, and particularly enjoyed by female consumers as well. And what's interesting with Ramos Pinto is that their analog in the 80s, Jean-Nicolas Nicolau Almeida had the courage to get into the Douro Superior, which was a region that was less experimented, in the area of Villanova de Foșcoa, which is actually the first spot to be part of the UNESCO heritage in 1996, before Douro became UNESCO heritage in 2001, and it was thanks to Ramos Pinto and João Nicolau Almeida that this spot was protected, because the government wanted to construct a big dam to the Coa River, so it wasn't possible anymore with the heritage, the UNESCO heritage. So a big battle that was won, and in the same time, João Nicolau Almeida experimented here with new plantings, not terraced plantings, also getting higher in the area with Quinta de Bonares, which doesn't produce port but Douro wines, because it's a very high altitude quinta and very fresh for the Douro wines. And also they implemented the big five, the big cincos, the big noble varieties, which are the Touriga Nacional, of course, the Touriga Franca, the Tinta Roriz, the Tinta Cao, and Tinta Amarela. And these are thanks to Ramos Pinto. So they started planting them plot by plot, harvesting them plot by plot, and vinifying in a Bordeaux, in a Chateau style, grape by grape, and then blending. And this is when their vintages started to get out in 82, 83. These were the first experiments. And now, since the 2000, I would say, and even in the 90s, they are very good vintages. But since the 2000s, their vintages are an example of elegancy, of voluptuous ports, still getting what we should say a Portuguese touch, because they're very voluptuous and very elegant in the same time. They don't have that backbone of the British style vintage, but they age very, very well. And yeah, of course, the tone is of 10, 20 and 30 years. They are really, really incredibly and technically well done. Yeah, this is a very, very good house in terms of Portuguese sheepers. And even if they belong to Louis Roederer now, as in all the houses Roederer acquired, they still preserve, of course, the family spirit. And you have Ana Rosas Ramos Pinto, who is the head winemaker. You have Georges Rosas, who is in all the areas of the house, in commercial, in the production, in everywhere. So it's a very charismatic personality. So the family is still there. This is very, very important for the family spirit. Getting to another Portuguese brand, which I really appreciate, is Cada Silva, better known for the Dalva. And there are two rarities. These are the golden whites. So these are white colaitas. Now they are written Colaita because these are recent releases. So even here you can get Colaita, but these are whites. So actually the first year to be released as a single harvest white, because the Colaita term didn't exist at that moment. In 1952, they released this 1952 golden white, because there was no term for white Colaita. It passed by the IVP at the moment, just like a Colaita, because it was so close to the Colaita style. But finally, they couldn't write a Colaita on the bottle. It was just a golden white, and it took the legislation of the white, and they reproduced it in 63. They reproduced it in 71, and the last release is the 89 here. And this is a 2018 bottling, because it's very important for all the single harvests of oxidative style so colheita, of course, to have the bottling year on the label, and because these are wines considered to be ready to drink, and it's very important to know when they were bottled. And since 2015, we have the right to write colheita on a white.
I see.
Since it respects all the requirements for a classic colheita, so it should be a single harvest. It should stay at least 7 years in wood, and having, of course, the qualities of the wine, because it should be of an exceptional quality. Even if, of course, the years for colheitas are not the same as years for vintages. They can be, but we don't ask them the same requirements as for a vintage, because you can see 63. It's a tremendous year for vintage, for red vintage.
Yeah.
But we don't search the same thing in a white single harvest or in a colheita. 89 is a very good vintage too. But if you talk about 71 and 52, they're not vintages for red. So it's just the cellar master that can choose what's the qualities for a colheita, and they're not the same, of course, for a vintage. And even less, of course, you can have even less approaches when you are talking about white. Because if you're talking about a red colheita, which is actually a tawny, you can have the structure. If you are in a big vintage, you can have the structure of the wine. But with whites, it's very different. You don't think in terms of tannins, in terms of structure, in terms of same acidity as for reds, of course. So a very, very peculiar style, and they're incredible. So it's really, really deep, profound. They have noble volatile, they have rancio, they have sauterlon, they get all this panel of dried fruits in orange, candied orange peel and citrus peels, and balsamics and spices, and the balance of the palate is so incredible, because you get acidity, you get a sweet palate without being luscious or extra sweet, very concentrated with fine volatile acidity, very focused on the finish, really incredible whites.
It sounds like poetry in a bottle, what you just said. Really incredible. You know, I've been drinking port all my life, and never had a flu, so I can abide by its qualities. Inexpensive or expensive, port is really actually something that's always been great for you. I don't, I can't say why, but it definitely, if it helped, sailors go around the world and not get sick, and well, I think that's maybe something there to look into. But so you were saying about another brand, I think, right? That you.
Yes. I would like to show you some producers as well. Like this is from Alves de Souza. Now Domenico and Tiago, his son, de Souza. This is the Quinta de Gaivosa.
Yeah.
So beautiful quinta. Now they rebuild the cellar, and it's all at the point of the technology. And this is a beautiful vintage 2016, which is a great vintage in the recent years. Very complete profile with it wasn't that hot as 17 or 18, for instance, so it really had that focused structure and very complete profile with acidity, with a beautiful texture as well, and more of the flowery and balsamic profile on the nose than that juicy, fruity character like you can have in 15 or even in 17 as well. So yeah, I particularly like what they do. They also make whites and tawnies, but of course they are Gaivosa vintage, and they also make a dry Douro from Quinta de Gaivosa, which is really, really incredible as well. And with Bruno, we enjoyed a vertical tasting some years ago for the 25th anniversary of the Quinta, and tremendous potential for aging even in the Douro, the red Douro brand.
Incredible.
And another producer, also one of the pioneers of those who moved into the Quinta maturing, is a Quinta de la Rosa. They're very close to Pinhao, and the view, it's incredible. It's tremendous. It's actually a kind of amphitheater that goes from 90 meters up to 400 meters, 400 and up. And the Inferno plot, which used to give a very concentrated vintage port, and now gives a Douro, a red Douro, very concentrated too. And this is a Colheita, so it's a red Colheita, 2009, bottled in 2018 too. But what's very interesting with their Colheitas is that they release them very quickly, so that you get a structure of the wine. So you can see it's a 9 years in oak, in wood. So you still, even the color is very deep. It's really still very, very garnet, and the wine is very fresh in terms of the nose. You still get a lot of fruit. You still get a lot of balsamics, of spices, and you have acidity and tannins, despite the fact that 2009 was a quite warm vintage too. So very interesting. Even their tannins are very, very colored. So not that kind of really tawny as we can imagine the color, the actual color of a tawny. Yeah, so I really enjoy their wines. They're very balanced in terms of sugar and acidity. It's never very, very boring on the palate.
It's such a rich story. This family, I actually did a story on them. There's a video on our website, Sommtable, and we were marveled at how beautiful the quinta is and the process. And we have pictures of the lagares and how they do the stumping. Really phenomenal history, very rich in culture, and how they fuse together with the land and story of port. Very nice. Good choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some other. Yeah, I can show you, for instance, a Burmester. So this is among houses that were neither Portuguese nor British. So Burmester, it's a German name because Burmester means Burgmeister. It's a mayor of a village or of a city. So they came from a family of mayors, and they established in Portugal. Burmester, it's today part of the Sojvinus. So it's a group that also has Kalem, Kopke. I mentioned Kopke, the oldest brand of port in 1638, and also Baroš. Now they focus. This is a single quinta vintage. From their Quinta Arnozello, the Quinta of the Spider, and this is a 2012. So 2012, it's not a big vintage, it's not a declaration. It started very well. It really looked like 2011 at a certain point, and then they had some hail in July, and of course, what stopped the process is that they had a lot of rain in September, which happens a lot in the Douro. They have a very peculiar moment by mid-September, 20th of September, where it's very harsh if they get a lot of rain, but it can be very good if they had just a spot of rain, and then withering with a lot of sunny weather, a kind of Indian summer, and which didn't actually happen in 2012. And this is why it's not a declaration. It's a single quinta vintage, except for producers like Noval, for instance, that declared it in a vintage process. But yeah, it's going to be like a mid-aging, mid-bodied. We're looking forward to opening it because it's not going to be that long as big vintages. But Burmester vintages, if we are talking about their vintages, they are very concentrated, they are very rich, they are very tannic. So I think they use the same process in the single quinta too. Among the four from Sojvinus, they are, I would say, those that really specialized in vintages, even though they have a beautiful townies and coloritas. But all the four focus a lot on wooded ports. Sojvinus is a Spanish investor, but they kept a kind of Portuguese idea of the port they make, and more focused on wood matured ports than vintages. They all have beautiful vintages when they release them, and Brunester is the most concentrated, most tannic, the most powerful of all. But of course, the wooded ports are very, very interesting with all the Sojvinus houses. What else I think is the last one? I would like to talk about Cluj. It's for me it's a great surprise during the last years, because living in France, of course, this is a brand that is maybe less known abroad elsewhere than in France. So this is the biggest brand sold in France. And Cluj is one of the biggest brands, actually is the biggest single brand of port. This is the Grand Cluj division, which is actually focused on vintages, on colleitas, on aged tawnies, and so on. We visited them last year, and we visited their new facilities in the Alejo area. It's so incredible how the technology has developed since also they bought the Ventosello, the Quinta de Ventosello in 2015, and they really focused, especially on the Grand Cluj line, they focused on a very constant quality. And this image that we had about Cluj in France as a big supplier, as a big brand, is now to pass, because they really have interesting vintages. They are very fruity, they are very juicy, not that structured, maybe, but not that balsamic like Ventosello, not that airy either. They have very interesting unfiltered LBVs that they only age in concrete and stainless steel. So they really keep a lot of tannic structure and can age some years after the bottling. And they start focusing on colleitas, because, of course, even if it's a French investment, it still has a Portuguese spirit, and they produce white colleitas, as you can see, in 2009 here. Yeah, very interesting style of white colleita. Very. It took some time to open when we opened the bottle, so it needed some breathing, because it's a very concentrated year, the 2009. But when it opened, it really showed a lot of baked apple, cooked fruits, and marzipan and spices, and a more luscious palate than the golden whites, which are of course more focused and with more volatile, but still very mastered in terms of balance. So yeah, it's a big surprise for our last discoveries, and especially after visiting the facilities they have in Alejo, and in the same time we also visited the Dalva and their lodge of Cluj in Gaia. Yeah, so really even in France, that we don't consume it as we should. French consume it as a pre-dinner drink most of the time. Yeah. I think that they can invest in education and maybe educate the client more with this brand, which is very popular in France.
Well, we'll definitely.
Yeah. So this is a collection of ports I gathered for our tour. Of course, there are so many things to say. I really like the Quinta do Infantado too, which are the very first to transfer to the Quinta. So even just before actually the official announcement in 1986, in 1979 they started actually producing in the Quinta, and they use a cellar which is not on the whole temperature controlled, so they still have this kind of Douro bag, but in a very mastered way, and very digest ports, very digest in terms of sugar, always drier than the average, focused on some organic and non-interventionist processes in the vines as well. Very, very good reflection about global changing of the climate, so how adapting the plots with field blends, and we really like the character. Joao is a very dynamic, completely dynamic.
We actually have a story on Santa also, but more on the bio side, because they are on one of those what do you call those arms of the Douro? They're in that special valley that has a combination of sun, but also enough shadow where he can produce really some of the incredible grapes. And his process of stumping the grapes is very interesting as well, which I find is a combination of mechanical and non. That is incredible. It's almost like you took us through a journey of incredible adventures here, in terms of, maybe this really is an armchair adventure with you, because we have gone through so many different this educational process has helped us travel through Portugal, but also through history. It's helped us get a sense of how terrific this port wine is, and it should be on everybody's table, really. I mean, a lot of people have not tried it and get port confused with a lot of other drinks, but port has really a way of going into your body and feeling so great about it. Like I said, I live by it. So what you've done here for us, Julia, is simply magnificent. I can't tell you how proud I am to have had you here with us today. Everything you've given us, we will not forget it. I am sure we'll be back to learn more from you. And all I can say is thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bertie. So for me, it's a pleasure and an honor. And of course, talking about port has always been, I don't know, I was completely linked with this cultural wine since the beginning. So I actually had my first attempt of the Master of Port in 2012, and I go to the finals. I was among the 4 finalists, and even if I didn't got it from the first spot, I felt like I don't know, I had to do something for this wine. So I started being like a self-proclaimed ambassador. So starting with a restaurant where I used to work at that moment, implementing some port wine dinners and working on the selection and port tonging wines in the restaurant. And then when I started teaching, making courses about port and master classes. And of course, then in 2017, I skipped the 2015 Master of Port for professional reasons, so I didn't attempt it in 2015, and then I did it in 17 and eventually had it. And I think this officialized actually my my self-proclaimed ambassador status, and I would like to do more for port. Personally, I think I have just a humble contribution, but I would like to do more about port and for port wine, and together with my classes, my students, even I don't know, programming voyages as soon as it's possible with students, with French students, bring them to the Douro region and really show them how marvelous this is. So
there could not be a better ambassador. Honestly, there could not be a better ambassador, and I can tell you that your passion comes through together with that humbleness as well. How could port not have anybody but you to represent it? So I tell you, I'm delighted. So thank you again for being here today, Julia, especially because it's late in France right now. Although you are in the south of France, so I'm not completely jealous, because it is a beautiful place to be right now. And I want to tell you again, we hope to see you very soon here. And again, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the invitation, and see you soon.
See you soon.